Police officer shaved two black girls' heads in court, but didn't know who their father was. On that cloudy Monday morning, the cold halls of the federal courthouse seemed even more oppressive. The high walls, the echo of footsteps, the hurried eyes of the employees. Everything there screamed formality, power, and detachment. But between these shadows, two small figures emerged that clashed with everything around. Ira and Nala, 9-year-old black twins, walking hand in hand, side by side with a tutor who held tight to her documents and her dignity. They wore simple but clean clothes, flowery dresses, worn flats, and in her hair, well-made braids that silently told the story of someone she cared for with affection. Your eyes, full of brightness, enchanted with the size of the place, with the pictures on the wall, with the figures in suits passing by in a hurry. It was their first time there, and even without understanding exactly why, they felt that something important would happen that day. But were they prepared for what was to come? How could two children suspect that even before any trial? Would they be judged? That's when everything stopped. The owner held out the identification document as protocol dictates, but the white police officer in front of the security door did not even look at the paper. He looked at them, from top to bottom. His brow furrowed, his eyes squinted. It was the kind of look that many black mothers know. A look that says nothing with words, but screams prejudice in silence. Have you ever felt that? That feeling that, just by existing, you are being inconvenient. He did not ask the reason for the visit. He did not question it kindly. He said, in a dry tone, "Where do you think you are going?" Ira shook her sister's hand. Nala took a step back. The tutor tried to explain. He said they were there as authorized visitors, that it was an open hearing, that the judge had allowed, but the policeman did not even pretend to listen. He smiled, not humor but sarcasm, and then, as if his uniform gave him unlimited authority, he pointed to a side corridor and said, "They're going that way. We have to verify." And you who are listening to this now, ever wondered what can happen when no one is looking? Or worse, when everyone is watching and yet chooses to be silent? Because what would these girls experience next? It would not be just an act of abuse. It would be a trauma disguised as a procedure, and the cruelest, it's just that who should protect them laughed. But what no one knew, it's just that they weren't so helpless. The door to the side room closed with a dry crack. It was small, windowless, with white concrete walls and a mirror that everyone knew was not a mirror, one of those observation windows used in interrogations. But Ira and Nala didn't know that. They only knew that they were there, cramped, with the tutor by their side trying to stay calm, trying to protect them with words that sounded too small for that environment that now seemed giant. The policeman walked slowly around the room, as if savoring every second of the power he thought he had. He didn't explain anything. He just looked again at the girl's braided hair and said, in a low but poisonous tone, "Looks are everything in a place like this. Let's solve it here," the tutor protested, of course. He showed documents, repeated the name of the judge who had authorized the entry, pointed to the cameras that were there at the top of the wall. But the policeman didn't care about cameras, nor with orders, nor with humanity. He seemed to thirst for control, as if seeing these helpless girls was an invitation to exercise an unhealthy kind of superiority. It was then that, out of nowhere, he picked up a pair of scissors. It was not a school scissors nor a paper scissors. It was a pair of scissors for institutional use, one of those large metallic scissors with sharp blades. And in front of the tutor who screamed, in front of the girls who trembled, he approached. "Be quiet. It's going to be quick." And then it began. First one side, then the other. The braids fell to the ground in silence, like leaves torn by force. With each cut, he let out a muffled laugh and said phrases that would freeze any heart. "Now, yes, cleaner. This is not a neighborhood salon. They will thank you later." Ira squinted, trying not to cry. Nala looked at her sister as if asking for help but also wanting to protect her. The two in silence asked themselves why. What did we do? But that's the wrong question. That's not what they did. That's what they represented. And for some, that is enough. The cameras recorded everything, every second, every gesture, every laugh. But no door opened, no superior intervened. No hand touched the policeman's shoulder and said, "Stop." Have you ever stopped to think about what happens when the entire system chooses not to see it? The tutor, in desperation, tried to stop her. She was pushed, humiliated. And the girls, they left the room with their eyes on the floor, their hair in pieces and their souls in silence. But the police officer did not. He left adjusting his belt, smiling with his colleagues who were waiting for him in the hallway. He made a joke. He said, "Now they are presentable." And at that moment, something much bigger than the entire courtroom began to move. Because what no one there knew is that someone saw it. Someone who didn't need the cameras. Someone who carried their blood, and that someone, he was sitting where none of them would ever dare to imagine. The courtroom corridor, usually filled with hurried steps and formal whispers, was suddenly paralyzed. It was not the silence of respect, nor that of legal concentration. It was a heavier silence. That kind of silence that screams cowardice. The doors to the side room opened. First, the tutor left, with red eyes, her chest heaving, her arms outstretched, as if still trying to protect the impossible. Then they came, Era and Nala. The cornrows that had once framed their faces were now on the floor, in pieces. Her hair had been reduced to uneven, rough, hurried cuts. Not out of vanity, but out of identity. And that's what they tried to wrest from them, their identity. But no tears flowed. And why not? Because sometimes, when you're black and you grow up in this world, you learn early on to swallow your tears, to avoid being told you're weak. He learns that showing pain gives the oppressor the victory he so desires. The girls walked side by side, in silence, looking at the ground. Each step was a weight, and around eyes. Eyes of security guards, attendants, lawyers. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew. But no one, absolutely no one, said a word. Some looked away, pretending to read papers. Others froze in place. But the most painful thing was not the aggression itself. It was the echo of institutional abandonment. Have you ever witnessed a moment of injustice and been silent? Have you ever felt the guilt of not having done anything, even though I knew I should? The tutor, between contained sobs, begged for explanations. He said that this was an abuse, a violence, a crime. But the answers were cold, technical, stifled by invented protocols. We're just complying with guidelines. Safety is a priority. It's not personal. Isn't it personal? How can it not be? The policeman, in turn, passed among his colleagues with an air of mission accomplished. He hit his seatbelt twice, smiled, and said loud enough to be heard, "Now yes, are presentable to see the judge." And no one laughed, but no one confronted him either. It was at that moment, at that exact second, that the entire court showed which side it was on, or rather, which side it was not on. Because sometimes silence is not just omission, it is complicity. But what that policeman and everyone else we didn't know yet, it is that someone watched them in silence. And this silence was not fear, it was waiting. Wait for the right moment, for the settling of accounts, for justice that on that day he would not use a hammer. I would use memory. The courtroom was imposing. Rows of varnished pews, flags in every corner, the crest of justice hanging above the pulpit, as a reminder that there, theoretically, everyone is equal before the law. Theoretically. The hubbub of the lawyers gradually dissolved when one of the doors opened, signaling that the session would begin. The same policeman, the one who minutes earlier had mutilated the dignity of two children, now laughed discreetly with colleagues in the corner of the room. He spoke softly, but loud, enough for the laughter to echo in the tense atmosphere. To him, all this was still just another ordinary day of service. And then, the referee entered, firm steps, dark suit, serene face but red-hot eyes. It was Judge David Amari. a man known for his impartiality, firmness, and calmness that they say is not taught. But that morning, there was something different. No one noticed right away. The audience greeted him with the usual respect. The lawyers stood up. The journalists arranged their notebooks. The policeman, this one, perhaps out of arrogance, perhaps out of ignorance, did not even look properly at who took the highest position in the room. He continued leaning against the wall, still making jokes. But if he had looked closely, he might have noticed that Judge David's eyes weren't just serious. They were embedded in it, focused, sharp as glass. How can a parent remain silent in the face of something like this? How is it possible to contain the fury, the instinct, the desperation to protect the daughters? The answer: control, but not just any control. It was the control of a man who knew that justice would come, and that at that moment, he himself would be the channel of that justice. David Amari didn't make a fuss. He didn't scream. He didn't get up abruptly. He didn't cry. But inside him, his heart hammered as if he were the one who had been wounded. Because in a way, was. He looked at the back seats where Era and Nala, now with discreet caps covering the cuts, were sitting silently next to their owner. Their eyes met for a second. The girls didn't smile, but they didn't deviate either. And in that brief instant of exchange, something invisible was sealed. They were not alone. Have you ever witnessed a look that says it all, even without making a sound? Have you ever felt the weight of a silent promise made only with your eyes? Because that's what happened there. And from then on, what would come? It wasn't just a trial. It was an answer, one that no one expected, much less the man who laughed. The hearing began like so many others. Formal processes, restrained voices, technical witnesses. The case of the day was about federal property, something cold, distant, protocol. Judge David Amari stood attentive, impassive, taking notes here and there as if nothing had happened before that morning. But those who knew him well, and few there really knew him, would notice. He wasn't really listening to what they were saying. He was waiting. The lawyer's words sounded like white noise. The entire courtroom worked like an anesthetized machine, unaware that a high-voltage cable was preparing to explode right there, in front of everyone. And the most curious? It was a trial without loud voices. There would be no theatrical scandal. There would be no noisy fury. There would be something much more dangerous: precision. After a little more than 20 minutes, the judge asked for a recess. He gave no explanation. He just wrote something down, got up and left, leaving a trail of uneasy silence in the room. When he returned, there was something in his posture, stiffer, firmer. His eyes now didn't run over the paperwork. They were fixed at a specific point, the side wall where the policeman, unconcerned, was drinking coffee in a styrofoam cup. He was still smiling. He still thought he was invisible. It was then that the judge's voice cut through the air like a blade. Ask that the security agent responsible for the 8:15 a.m. screening present himself at the front, now. The silence fell like a weight. Some exchanged glances. Others instinctively looked at the policeman. It took him a second to realize that it was up to him. He straightened his uniform, chuckled in disconcertment, and walked to the front with vaguely sloppy steps as if he didn't take it seriously. After all, what could be wrong? He did it all the time, right? Arriving at the center of the room, he stopped in front of the judge and waited for a routine question. But what he received, it was a look he didn't recognize. Or maybe you recognized it too late. Because when her eyes finally locked on David Amari's face, something changed. Security slipped from his shoulders. Laughter dried on his lips. And a seed of doubt, or perhaps fear, began to spread. What if? The judge then said in a controlled, almost calm tone, "We need clarification about an incident that occurred today in this institution. And we'll do that now, under oath." The policeman looked around. No one smiled this time. The atmosphere had changed. Suddenly, he was no longer the hunter. It was the hunt. Have you ever seen someone realize that they lost control? When did you think you were in charge? The room, now full, made no noise, because sometimes the biggest impact comes not from what is shouted, but from what is said in a low voice, with the truth in their eyes and righteousness in the heart. The policeman was still standing, but his legs no longer had the same firmness as before. The air in the room seemed denser, as if something invisible had descended there, pressing on everyone's shoulders. He looked around for support, a colleague, a complicit look, any sign that he still had control of the situation. But he found nothing, just serious looks, many indignant, others in shock. It was then that Judge David Amari turned to the technical team and said firmly, "Project video number 47, internal security, side corridor. Time, 08:19 in the morning." The lights in the room dimmed. A screen lit up at the back of the court, and everyone watched. First appeared the image of the girls being led into the room. Then, the tutor questioning. The audio was clear. The policeman responded with mockery. "Let's make these girls more presentable." Laughter. Cut, 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 the braids falling to the floor. The tutor crying. The girls were silent, trembling. More laughter. Now, yes, the entire court was paralyzed. A journalist dropped his pen. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. One of the security guards on the side turned his face, embarrassed. Have you ever seen the truth explode like a grenade in a place where everyone pretended not to see? It is like this, silent at first, explosive in the end. But the judge did not stop there. He pulled a new document from the archive in front of him. It was thick, stamped, and numbered. It appears in this court that the agent in question had already been the target of 4 previous complaints for improper conduct, all filed for lack of evidence. A new murmur spread. Now there were no more doubts. It was not an isolated mistake. It was a pattern, a repeated behavior. A system that protected him. The policeman tried to explain himself, the voice now trembling, confused. "I just was following protocol. I thought that was necessary." But it was too late. The images spoke for themselves. Words were useless. Authority had turned to dust. The judge then looked directly at him. And this time not as a judge, but as a father. Have you ever seen a father face someone who has hurt his daughters? It's not fury, it's something more dangerous. It's coldness with purpose. The room was still silent. But now it was no longer for complicity. It was for shock. Because at that moment, everyone understood. Justice had finally woken up. The courtroom was still under the impact of the images. When Judge David Amari leaned back slightly in his chair, it was a small gesture, almost imperceptible. But in it there was a millimetric pause, as if carrying the weight of something much bigger. He looked at the papers in front of him, then at the policeman in front of him, and finally to the emptiness of the room, as if speaking to the collective consciousness of that place. Then, without raising his voice but with each syllable charged with authority, he declared, "This court will not tolerate any act that violates human dignity, especially of children, especially within the walls that are supposed to protect them." The policeman, now pale, no longer tried to defend himself. He only lowered his eyes, perhaps for the first time understanding the dimension of what he had done. But for David, it no longer mattered. Personal punishment was just the beginning. What needed to be done, it was structural. As of this moment, this agent is formally suspended from all security-related activities in this institution. The images, affidavits, and documents will be sent directly to the Department of Justice for criminal and federal investigation. The phrase fell like a hammer, but he didn't stop. The judge pulled a second document. It was shorter, but it carried a greater symbolic weight than any sentence. "In addition," he said, now looking at each face present, "a new permanent guideline of conduct, oversight, and accountability is in place for the entire security body of this court. This new policy will be called the Ira and Nala Amendment, the AT, name echoed in space like a beat in the chest, in honor of my daughters, not only for what they suffered, but for the silent strength they showed in the face of violence that should never have happened." It was at that moment that all those present understood what they had actually witnessed. It was not just an audience. It was a rupture, a watershed. Some tried to applaud, but the sound did not come. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. Because there were times when silence, it was the only answer to match. A respectful silence, of shame and of promise. Have you ever seen a place where justice has finally truly risen? Not to pee, but to honor the little ones, to rewrite rules on behalf of those who have not been heard. That day, Era and Nala didn't just regain their dignity. They have become ground zero for a new era. The sun was beginning to sink below the horizon, tinging the marble staircases of the courthouse orange and gold. The corridors, which hours before had been brimming with tension, were now emptier, but the echo of that day's events still hung in the air like an invisible presence. Outside, sitting on the top rung of the main stairs, were Era and Nala, one with her hands in her lap, the other slowly fiddling with the shoelaces, both with discreet caps covering what was left of their hair. But what no one realized at first glance was that, even in silence, they were different. Not minors, not defeated, but erected, in a way that only those who go through pain and survive with dignity can stay. The tutor next to her maintained her firm posture like a silent wall. Around, employees, curious people, members of the press. Everyone was waiting for some movement, but no one approached. Because in that instant, the space around those girls seemed sacred. And then, he showed up. Judge David Amari walked down the steps with slow but sure steps. No toga, no formalities, no symbols of power. Just one man, in front of his daughters. As he approached, time seemed to slow down, and when he came within one step of them, he didn't speak. He didn't ask. He did not try to disguise the pain or guilt that still weighed on his shoulders. He knelt down. The crowd around, which had previously spoken quietly, came to a complete stop. No sound, no camera clicking, only the sound of the wind and the murmur of the city in the distance. David brought one hand to Era's shaved head with delicacy, like someone holding something sacred. Then he did the same with Nala. His gaze was not one of pity. It was one of admiration, of reverence. And without saying a single word, he said it all. He said they were brave, that he saw them, that he would never let them go through this alone again, that they were at that moment the strongest women he knew. Have you ever seen the world stop to learn from the silence of a child? The crowd did not applaud. He didn't scream. He just noted, and in that respectful silence, something changed. Because on that day, it was not the laws, nor the speeches, nor the punishments that taught the world anything. They were two black girls with their heads held high, even without hair. That showed the true meaning of strength. And sometimes that's what turns a story into a legacy. How many times has justice had to be taught by those who suffer the most from its absence? Era and Nala entered that courtroom as children, but they left as symbols. They had no uniform, microphone, or positions of power. They had only the truth, the pain, and the dignity. And even after having their hair pulled out, they have not lost what no one can cut: inner strength. This story is not just about racism, abuse, or institutional silence. It's about the moment when the structure shakes, because two girls decided not to lower their heads, even when they shaved it. What about you? Will he remain silent in the face of the small violence of everyday life? Or will it be part of the change, even with a simple gesture of positioning? If this touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video now with someone who needs to understand that respect is not a favor, it's an obligation. Leave a comment with the phrase, "They were not silent." And if you want to see more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Because here, the truth finds the voice they have denied for centuries. The next video can change more than your day. It can change your worldview. Are you ready for it?